When it comes to provocative language, I believe as Christians we have to use provocative language because we live in a world where it's easy to be ignored. Mark Driscoll. Hello everyone, my name is Brandon Correa, and tonight I'm just going to give you a brief overview of my literature review, which I entitled But Jesus Said Ask, a literature review on the use of Christian profanity and communication accommodation theory. Now, in order for you to understand my results and my findings, I'm going to go through my paper just as how I wrote it. I'm first going to talk about communication accommodation theory and the important factors of that theory. Then I'm going to move on to some of my articles. I've separated them into two parts. One, the profanity that has been rising in America, and two, the Christian profanity that is rising. And then finally, I'm going to end with my results and my findings and some recommendations for future research. So to begin, communication accommodation theory. Communication accommodation theory is founded by Howard Giles, and it is one of the most important communication behavioral theories out there. That is because communication accommodation theory helps us understand why we act and communicate to the behaviors that we do. And this is because of two elements of communication accommodation theory: convergence and divergence. Convergence is known as coming together. So for instance, convergence would be mimicking. So let's say you and I are having a conversation and we are doing the same hand gestures, or we're talking at the same speed, or both of our hands are in our pockets, something along those lines. That's the type of mimicking that is known as convergence. That is because convergence shows approval, bonding. It even can persuade the other speaker to listen to you. So there are several benefits to convergence. So if I wanted to be your friend, I didn't know you very well, I could converge while we were speaking together, and that would help make a bond between us. Now, divergence is the exact opposite. Divergence is when I'm going to exaggerate my speech in order to diverge, to show that there's a difference between us. So for instance, if I'm from the South and I have a really thick Southern accent, and you're from New Jersey and you have your real thick New Jersey accent, then I may diverge with you because I may think that my accent's better. It doesn't mean that I don't like you, but I want to show that there is a difference between us, that we do not speak the same. So now that we know a little bit about communication accommodation theory, I'm going to talk about my articles. And to begin, I'm going to talk about the ones specifically about profanity. Now, one of the most shocking articles that I read was Profanity on the Rise. Preschool profanity on the rise. Researchers find by Misty Harris. She found that children as young as 2 years old are dropping the F-bomb. Researchers are reporting that kids are using more profanity within the last 3 decades, and they believe that is because of their parents, the adults in their lives, parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents, whoever are using profanity, and that's dovetailing the impact that the children are able to use profanity. Now, this article doesn't prove that this is because of convergence and accommodation. It could be the children could think, oh, this is how mommy and daddy talk. I want to talk like mommy and daddy, and that will gain their approval. And so that could be convergence and accommodation. However, it could just be more of an habitual thing. Children learn to speak from their parents, and if they learn from a young age, like 2 years old, they could just start cursing right then. My next article is Public Profanity on the Rise by Craig Wilson and Gary Mihosis. Now, they talk about profanity has been in our language for hundreds of years, and no one has been able to get rid of it. Not the Christians, not the Protestants. It's just an expression of our emotion, and that's why it's okay that it's used. They also found that because profanity is used so much, that the younger generation is inured by profanity. They are so shocked when someone is actually offended by the use of profanity because it's just in their minds, it's in their brain, it's every day they're talking. They go to school, they go to work, profanity is everywhere. So now that I've talked about profanity being on the rise in America, I'm going to talk about profanity being on the rise in the Christian society. In Who Would Jesus Smack Down by Molly Worthen, she talks about Mark Driscoll. And if you're not sure who Mark Driscoll is, he's a pastor of Mars Hill Church in Seattle, Washington. He's also the founder of the Acts 29 network of churches. He's not the one in charge anymore, but he's still on the board if you wanted to look him up online. Now, Driscoll feels personally called to the young American men. He feels that he needs to save them from American Protestantism that has emasculated Christ and driven men from the church pew. Now, I think this is really sad, but Mark Driscoll continues to go on. The mainstream church has transformed Jesus into a Richard Simmons, hippie queer Christ, a neutered and limp-wristed popular sky fairy who has no intent to send anyone to hell and not even talk about hell. Not at all, ever. This is what Mark Driscoll believes that the main church is doing. He also says that in his interview that I found on YouTube with Richard Kogan, that there's a lot of reasons that people don't go to church. But one of the reasons is that we aren't talking about what they want to hear. He says that the majority of his church is single, college educated in their 20s. They don't have a church background and they are very sexually active. So they walk through the door not like the average 60-year-old woman who's grown up in a rural church. Now, Mark Driscoll, just right there, talks about how he's converging with his audience because they don't come from a rural background like he said a 6-year-old woman might. He, again, is talking about how it's a different congregation, and so he needs to converge and adapt with them and accommodate their differences. And so that's why he feels is acceptable to use some of the language that he uses from the pulpit. In a group study, the Barna Group, who was found by George Barna, and he does studies with America and morality and Christianity. The study is entitled Young Adults and Liberals Struggle with Morality. They found that the younger generation was more than twice as likely as all other adults to engage in behaviors considered morally inappropriate. They also found in regards to profanity that 2/3 of their under 25 segment, which was 64%, had admitted to using profanity in public. But of that percentage, 16% of those claimed to be evangelical Christians. Finally, my last article is by Jonathan Acuff, who is a Christian author and has wrote books called Stuff Christians Like. He entitled his article, Occasionally Swearing. He says if you're a non-believer and you swear at him, it's not that big of a deal. You're not going to get a reaction out of someone. However, if you're a Christian and you're swearing, birds are going to fall out of the sky and trees are going to shake at their limbs. Now, obviously, that's not the case. However, he wanted to get across that when a Christian uses profanity, there is that kind of reaction from non-Christians. They can't believe what they're hearing. This is something that has to do with our witness, and it's very important that we remember that. He ends his article with, reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Proverbs 12:8. So as you can see from my articles in the communication accommodation theory that I have talked about, I have proven that profanity is on the rise in America. However, I can't fully state that because of accommodation and convergence is why Christians are cursing. I need to do a lot more research, which is recommended for my future research. And if anyone is ever interested in taking on this topic, to maybe study other churches and other denominations and survey people and ask them if they curse, and if so, what have been the cases and why do they do so. So today you have found out that about communication accommodation theory and the articles that I've used, and that there is not necessarily a correlation between communication accommodation theory and swearing. However, there could be, and in order to find out, I may have to do more research. Thank you for listening to my speech, and I hope you have a great night.